Cheers. Okay, so I heard Shirley say that she wasn't talking about anything super high tech. This is even more low tech than that. So I hope this is still going to be relevant. So the problem that I wanted to talk about was how do you get online tutorials to work, given that students are sitting remotely, often isolated in their own bedrooms rather than working with their peers like they would normally be. And to be honest, the answer is I have no idea, so I can't answer this. But what I do want to do is to give you some things which have worked for me and some things which have worked for my colleagues in Manchester. So just to give you a bit of context, pre-COVID, this is what a tutorial looked like for us, just established terminology. So a typical course unit had one weekly tutorial, and there were some tasks that students had to do in these tutorials. And the kind of basic version would be they'd have an exercise sheet and they'd be working through whichever random bit of the exercise sheet they wanted to look at, and they'd put their hand up when they got stuck. And the kind of advanced version would be where there were things which were designed specific to that tutorial. So the typical way that I would do it would be I'd start off with a Kahoot or something like that quiz, and then there'd be a scaffolded worksheet that the students worked through during that time, and then I'd talk about some of the more interesting bits or the more difficult bits at the end of the session. And when you do this, obviously, typically the students will sit together in friendship groups, even though they may actually be working individually, but they will be talking and interacting with their peers as they do so. And one can't do that as easily online. And there's also a member of staff and there's usually a GTA there as well to walk around the class, which again, one can't do. I think a crucial thing for us, at least at Manchester, is that the tutorials can be pretty large. It's quite normal if everybody's there for a tutorial to have upwards of over 100 students present. Okay, so how do we do that, try and replicate all that online? Well, getting students to self-direct their work, so give them an exercise sheet and just say, do what you like, that doesn't work on an online tutorial. And to be honest, I don't think it works on campus either, but that's a whole different talk, which I won't get into. We've got the problem, the well-known problem, that students don't like turning their cameras on, particularly in front of people they don't know. It's hard to get students to share mathematics. The normal way, or easiest way, is to get them to write something on a piece of paper and just hold it up at the camera, but that's not brilliant either. And I was finding that a lot of my colleagues were defaulting to just giving another lecture. So what should have been an environment where the students engage and actually actively do mathematics just turned out to be the lecturer didactically talking about stuff. So one solution to this is to try and use breakout rooms, but as we know, a lot of students hate breakout rooms. So myself and some colleagues kind of swapped ideas around this, so I can't claim credit for this. A lot of this came from my colleagues, and none of this is rocket science. This is just easy things which, small changes which seem to have a substantially larger effect than one might imagine. So breakout rooms, some students love them, some students hate them. So it's how do you get that balance right? And the key thing seemed to be to let students to pick their own breakout rooms, which halfway through semester, Zoom allowed you to do easily. So 6 weeks earlier would have been great, but allowing students to pick their own breakout room and work in their own friendship group worked really well. But then there were some students who just never liked working either on with people even on campus, or who don't feel comfortable being in a breakout room. And if you allowed them to stay in the main room and work individually, that seemed to work really well. And then I had one room which was designated as a one-to-one room. So I would tell students, don't go in there yourself to work with other people, but if there's something that you want to speak to me or the GTA individually about, go in there, we will notice, and then go along and be able to chat to you one-to-one. That wasn't used that often, but when it was, that was a particularly valuable experience for the students, often raising concerns that they would not be willing to raise in an environment where there may be other students listening. And then I and the GTA would move around the breakout rooms as one would normally do if one was on campus. The key thing that I learned from this pretty quickly was that it's even more important online to have well-defined tasks. that students do in these online tutorials, and they need to be designed so that they work in an online setting. So here's some things which worked for me. I did need to think through this. I needed to think about what I would get the students to do. And even in the before times, before COVID, I liked scaffolded worksheets. So that's where, instead of taking an exercise and say, do the exercise, I'd break it down a bit. So I would explicitly say, write down the definition of something, or then next bit, calculate some stuff, and then hence work out some more stuff. Whereas the exercise might have just been work out whatever the more stuff bit is. So I'm breaking things down. That work, I did try doing that in online tutorials early on, and it worked okay, but you've got the problem of trying to get students to talk to each other when they can't easily communicate maths apart from holding up bits of paper all day. If I changed how the questions were worded, even though they'd be doing the same thing, it seemed to have a dramatic impact in how getting the students to talk to each other and to engage with the mathematics and to work with each other. So instead of just write down the definition, it'd be things like, in your group, give 3 examples of the definition, or how would you explain the definition to somebody who's not seen it before? And you get them talking about it. And that, at least in my department, that would be quite an unusual thing to ask the students to do. That would not be a typical thing they would do in tutorials, but it seemed to work really well. Then instead of actually getting them to calculate things, get them to explain how they will calculate it. So to actually do the calculation, just explain the processes that you will go to go through this. And that was getting them to talk to each other, and seemed to have it seemed to work pretty well in getting engagement going. And a couple of times I tried something that was completely different. And I just want to finish by giving you one example of this. So this was a design your own assessment task. And I did assure them that I was not going to use any assessments or questions that they thought up in any real assessment. This is purely for them. So they got a brief description as to how assessment would work. So told them what a learning outcome actually meant, how it relates to Bloom's taxonomy or solo and that kind of thing. Gave them some past exam paper questions to look at as well. And then they had a role play exercise of designing an assessment task that would assess whether some of their friends that they'd been teaching had met one of the learning outcomes of the course. And they had to come up with a mark scheme as well. And I've tried this on campus and it worked pretty well. I was amazed at how well it worked on doing it online. It really worked well to get the students talking to each other. And the benefits, the reasons for doing this is, firstly, it gets the students to think about what assessment means and what we're looking for when we assess them. It also makes them look at the material that I've been teaching them in the course, and they then got to think about this at quite a high level in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. And it works really well as a group activity as well. So there's been no evaluation of any of this because it's way too early in the cycle. So all of this is completely anecdotal. All the feedback I've had from students, either informally through the class or via student reps in our student forum, student liaison committee, whatever you want to call it, that's been positive. Crucially for me is the emails from a small but non-zero number of students thanking me for persevering with breakout rooms. Given that all of our teaching in Manchester has been online since September, there's been very few opportunities for the students to see each other and to talk to each other. And for some students who are feeling pretty isolated, this has worked really well for them. Okay, and that's all I wanted to say. So thank you.
Right, well, thank you.